full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio and Education tonight. And it's been a wonderful sunny day. Well, certainly where I've been anyway. I think it has been across most of the country. And I know kind of people are really kind of getting to that kind of final line of breaking up. I just wanted to share this with you, Paul. I thought we've done a bit of a kind of campaign on education tonight about the war on water in classrooms.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, you know what? Why not just join them?
Good.
You know, when you kind of carry one of these things around, you realise what a significant amount of water it is to consume during the school day.
It is indeed.
We've gone for it. I think I calculated with my daughter, it's about maybe 3 litres of water that they're taking into the classroom. Yeah, so there you go. So you know, that you never know, that it'll take one child about one lesson to go through that. So maybe I'll sip it kind of slowly during the show. But are you in good health, Paul?
All good, yes. We haven't had the weather you seem to have had today, but yes, all's good. And summer's flying through.
I know.
Are you on holiday yet, Adam?
We're not broken up yet, actually. Yeah, I found a funny meme. If we could just kind of put that up about kind of how maybe teachers are kind of feeling at the minute, kind of as we're coming through to the end of term. I think that's the question. I think last week we said that why does the last week seem like all the other days kind of put together? But so I work in FE, so it's slightly different. So we don't have the large kind of summer holidays, but but we have got some downtime, so we're looking at kind of resources and that type of thing, which is fantastic. But tonight we have an absolutely action-packed show tonight. We've got 2 halves of the show. The first half we are going to be speaking to Frank Norris and Edmund Barnett Ward, and we are looking at the future of Ofsted again. And particularly this has come up the radar because the alternative Ofsted Big Listen survey results kind of came out. So we'll have a look at that again, and hopefully kind of Frank can join us shortly for that. And the other thing, it's story 2, which is kind of a shocking story, which has continually kind of bubbled up since COVID. And I'm really, really delighted to say that we're joined by author, journalist. I think she's actually kind of editor of the Empire magazine at one point, someone told me, which is fantastic. We've got Terry White. Sorry, say again?
Podcaster as well.
All round kind of journalist. We'll be debating this kind of idea about kind of ghost children, and as we've had this conversation this week, even as a team, and I'm sure kind of Terry wants to have this conversation. Is that even the right term to be using? Has this kind of come on to us so much that actually we haven't even got the language to kind of go through it properly. But essentially what we're looking at is missing children, or children that are not on a kind of a school register on a day-to-day basis. They don't seem to be homeschooled. We've essentially somehow since COVID lost track of a large amount of children, which is kind of is quite worrying in a lots of respects. And the social implications of that going forward and what they could be like. So there's lots to unpack. I do want to start though by just saying a big thank you to our sponsors tonight, because we're always grateful for sponsors. And it's always at this time of the evening where we say hello to John Catt. So we always say hi, John, on Education Tonight, and you can go to John Catt Educational by going to www.johncattbookshop.com and use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order, which is great thinking about summer coming up. And we have teaching how-tos, and you can visit teachinghowtos.com. That's a platform that features over 160 visual evidence-based guides on teaching techniques, and you can register there for their next webinar, which is fantastic again. Reading Solutions UK, at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk, International Reading Conference. You can sign up to see their free videos, which is fantastic as well. Thank you to them. Apps for Good, which you can visit at www.appsforgood.org. They're computing courses for everybody. We've talked before about kind of the digital divide and how students are not particularly well prepared for that type of world. So boosting anything around computer science. I know schools are under massive strain for computer science, so there could be some resources there for you as well, which is fantastic. Okay, so the results of the big talk came out, and I don't think kind of Frank's with us at the minute, so maybe just check in on him. Oh, there he is. Good evening.
I struggle logging on to this setup. I'm just awful, but apologies for being late.
No worries, and thank you for coming on tonight. So the results came out from your alternative Ofsted big listen.
Yeah.
So do you want just to run us through some of the kind of the key headlines that you discovered? So the results came out, was it last Thursday night, Friday morning?
Yeah, last Friday.
Friday morning.
We were sort of aware that Reading Council were going to release their learning review. So we intended to hold off until September, but thought it makes sense to try and align with the learning review. So we published last Friday, well ahead of where we wanted to be. So it was a mad rush to get everything together. I have to say, we thought the results were going to be bad, but the results were worse than we thought. And, in a survey, we had nearly 1,400 respondents. That's nowhere near as many as Ofsted will get, but we're only looking at schools. Ofsted's looking at the full range of its services and all aspects. So, we were delighted to get 1,400 and to get 9 out of 10 people saying that Ofsted's not fit for purpose, to get nearly 9 out of 10 saying that, 1 and 2 word judgment should be, stopped, and that about the same number saying that there should be a moratorium, really, so that Ofsted can have a chance to reconsider again what its core purpose is and how it goes about its business. That's pretty stunning results, to be honest. I think one that stuck in my mind was the high proportion of respondents who thought that Ofsted wasn't really a fair process for all schools. And I think what's behind that, as somebody who has worked a lot of his time in sort of some of the more challenging areas, it does make me feel, I've always felt rather sort of saddened that the inspection process appears to favour those who already got the most advantage and doesn't always give full credit for some of the amazing work that goes on in some of the most challenging communities. And I think that judgment for me is a fundamental weakness in the process. If it cannot inspect all schools fairly, then actually I think we have a really big problem. And I think it's, we've had a very positive response. We've had no response whatsoever from Ofsted, which I don't think is a surprise to Edmund, but no comment at all. But we've had a very positive response from the education community. We had a lot of press coverage, and I think that the general response is that just wait and see what Ofsted come up with, because the way I thought it's quite clever. I wasn't responsible for this decision. The other colleague, Professor Colin Richards, came up with that, in that we wanted to ask some of the questions that Ofsted didn't ask, but also we wanted to ask some of the questions that they were asking, because we wanted to see is there a difference between the responses we got and the responses that went into Ofsted's official big listen. And I think that's quite, it'll be quite telling to see what comes out. Now, as somebody who's worked, in
You've pre-warned them now, though, Frank.
I beg your pardon, Edmund?
you've pre-warned them now, though. You've given the game away. You've told them what you're doing. That's like
And I think you might be right. I mean,
can I just ask Edmund quickly? What's your kind of initial reaction to those kind of results?
Well, I think we're getting into an alarming pattern of affirmation of proving things that we already knew to be true. So from my perspective, it started with conversations, one-to-one conversations with Gillian Keegan, with sitting down with Ruth Perry's sister Julia Waters and explaining what the system meant on a personal level. Throughout that process, teasing out a whole host of problems, and it seemed like more things became obvious as we went along. But at the end of the day, people's opinions in the heart of essentially a tragedy. So it's always good, everyone always said it's good to get backup, reinforcement. First we had the inquest, then we had an exhaustive review from the Commons Select Committee. I really think that was a brilliant piece of research with a fantastic array of witnesses, both oral testimony and written statements. I know Frank contributed, I contributed, and if you followed John Cosgrove's done a brilliant summation of a lot of that evidence. It's really worth looking at his blogs about what's happened. And, I was very proud to put my endorsement to Frank's work because I know how dedicated Frank is to the concept of school improvement, to the whole idea that we should be engaged in school accountability and school improvement. It's like nobody from my side of this conversation has ever asked for anything less than a fair system and a system that's not destructive to educators. Yeah. And so, am I surprised at the results? Not in the slightest. Yeah. And even some of the results that would sort of potentially seem to be slightly anomalous in terms of conversations that we've been having, I can still understand within the context of the way the data has been collated and analysed. So you might look at something like safeguarding, and there's a lot of conversation about how we really should be looking at doing more frequent safeguarding checks that are much lower stakes, but perhaps as a separate regulatory framework. And so maybe it's surprising that only a third of respondents thought that that Ofsted didn't understand the safeguarding picture within their setting. But my response to that would be that's affirmation bias, because you've got in a situation where you have been assessed, then to say that the person that assessed me doesn't understand that I'm good when they've said I'm good is to in a way to say that you're bad. So
while we talk about biases, can I just come in there with the kind of the survey results? It does seem to be kind of heavily weighted, or certainly the respondents seem more heavily weighted from the primary sector. Do you think that was a kind of reaction to the Ruth Perry inquest, that it was that sector that was really alarmed by all this?
I don't have the answer to that, Adam. You're right, though, that there were more primary responses. I think that, I don't really want to give too much away, but there perhaps is a reason for that. And we reached out to various trade unions and professional bodies, and some of them were more open to sharing than others, and some were late sharing, even though they may have shared. So I think there's some of that playing into it. And again, the point on bias is, Ofsted, we tried to use a system which stopped you using the same email address, or at least your sort of IP address. as a way of stopping bots. And that may, if people were trying to do that in a big secondary school, perhaps using one system or whatever, that may have prevented some people from making, from gaining access at that site. I'm not sure, the actual technical problems that some people may have faced, but whatever it was, Ofsted the same system, I suspect. So they didn't select that. They were unable to select who completed their survey. We were unable to select. And I think that even though our numbers may be lower, fewer than the people completing it than the Ofsted one, I still feel that to get nearly 1,400 responses is a for just two guys trying to put this survey out with the support of a very sort of respected group of supporters was pretty admirable. I think there's. I mean, I was very concerned about the bias right from the outset, and we were. I mean, in the report, we make clear all the not all of them, but the main weaknesses that we could identify, so that the reader's aware of some of the limitations of the survey. But it's
so Bridget Phillipson's kind of made clear. I don't know if you saw the conference earlier on in the week where she spoke to teachers. She's really keen to move towards this report card system and really look at the whole kind of Ofsted framework per se. So where does this kind of campaign go? Is it kind of dead before it started because Bridget Phillipson seems more on side now and that type of thing? Or
I think she was on side before we knew. I've met Bridget, I think 3 times in the last year. I think it's fairly clear. She signalled the scorecard. She's signalled the, losing the 1 and 2 word judgments. But I have spoken about the scorecard. That, we've got to be very careful. We're not sort of just moving from one problem into another one. And I've seen some mock-ups of scorecards, which actually I think, probably do need a lot more work on them. They pose more questions than answers, particularly for those who are not, heavily involved in education like I am. I'm sort of looking at it for your average parent and thinking, well, what does all this mean? But in some respects, I do like the idea that there's a range of, information, evidence available to parents, because a parent with a child who's got sort of dyslexia or whatever, that their needs they may be looking at the school for some slightly different with a different sort of flavor to somebody whose child is perhaps very sporty or whatever, so that scorecard needs to sort of address quite a range in terms of need. And some of the scorecards I've seen are very simplistic, and I
just find it interesting what you're saying about kind of Bridget Phillipson was already on side in some respect on this. So there has been some criticism saying, was this just a little bit of kind of political kind of gesturing to kind of kick Ofsted, kick the previous kind of Department of Education? How do you react to that kind of question?
Well, our survey or Bridget Phillipson?
Your survey.
I suppose, in a sense, the main concern, the reason why we did it was purely on the fact that both Colin and I completed the official version and thought it was a bit of a stitch up. I mean, we didn't, when we completed it, we didn't think, oh well, let's have our own alternative survey. It was really the fact that it didn't ask the questions in such a way that they were seeking a deep understanding of what the issues were, and some of the issues were ignored. So the 1 and 2 word judgment, that as a clear statement, as a clear question, was not asked, and the response was, well, you can put your response to that in the text box. Well, anybody who's done, and I'm not an academic, but anybody who's done that sort of level of work will think, well, actually that's very difficult to extract. What is this actually saying? Whereas we asked a very straightforward question and we got a very clear response. So I certainly, our response was not to be supportive of Labour's move or to be critical of the government. It was just a pure response to how poor the official Ofsted survey was, and we felt it was a stitch up, and we still feel that, and that's the reason why we did it.
I'll just come to you, Edmund. And Amanda Spillman at the time was very clear that Ofsted should be allowed to make judgments and that is its role, and it's other people's role to then kind of fix the issues and deal with them. Do you think Ofsted as a body are able to change?
My answer to this is probably might be surprising to some people, but I think essentially yes, to a degree. Mm-hmm. So, as a standalone branch of government that's subject to the rules of the civil service, it should be beholden to the government of the day. And their agenda. So, I mean, this in our particular case, there was a rather odd situation that we had where Gillian Keegan would constantly say to us that they were not able to control Amanda Spielman, and they were not able to stop her from saying whatever it was that she felt that she needed to say about the Capital Primary inspection and the situation, and that under the legislation, when you look at the Education Acts 2005 and 2006, only the King can remove her from office or can remove.
Yeah, it's a Crown appointment, isn't it?
They're a Crown appointee, but the sort of why it's such a complex situation is because the terms of reference for their position is actually set at appointment by the Secretary of State. So this is the reason why all last year they could say we can't control Amanda Spielman and we can't stop her from doing anything she wants to do. And then all this year, Martin Oliver's been saying, I can't do anything differently to what the government tells me to do. Because it depends on the terms of reference, how it was set up. Clearly, his position was set up with that in mind. But I'll make a prediction about Martin and what happens in the future. I mean, I think his silence has been entirely about waiting for the dust to settle and seeing what's happened. And I fully expect him to re-emerge as if from a chrysalis in September with a sort of renewed vigor for a new agenda for reform and change, because that is what the government directs. Now, whether they decide that he is or isn't their man and should stay in that position, I don't know. It's an extremely difficult position to get rid of. And my personal feeling is that the entire setup at Ofsted, the way that the Tories left it, was to make it as awkward as remotely possible. I mean, Gillian Keegan's former SPAD, Rory Gribble, going in as a policy and engagement director, and the appointment of Sir Martin, etc., etc. But I think there's a sort of, there's a point where there will be they will have kicked the can down the road as much as they possibly can, and I've no doubt at all that their big listen was entirely designed to halt all reform to Ofsted for as long as remotely possible, until it wasn't going to be the Tories' problem anymore, because they never thought they were going to win the election. So
just very quickly, because I do want to allow Paul to come in. I do want Frank to come in as well. Why do you think that is the case? What was the can kicking? Why would there not be reform?
Well, simply because it was clearly central to the former government's education policy. There is something about the way that Ofsted collected its information, which was expedient and useful in terms of their statistics, but that coupled with it being a very convenient mechanism for academizing schools. So the entire education agenda which was to slowly make every school, part of an academy, to effectively abolish the local authority system and turn everything over to academies. It was, that was the mechanism they chose. I mean, they didn't do it honestly in terms of just making it a manifesto policy and get elected on the basis that they were going to reform education in that way. And so, we now have this bizarre hodgepodge of things going on, and we really do need to bring everything together and come up with a system that recognizes the vast array of education establishments that we're dealing with now, because it's a completely different landscape.
Well, brilliant. That's the final question then, really, Frank. What is the next step? What does Ofsted, I don't know, 2.1, whatever, look at with this answer?
Well, I think I delivered 2 school inspection frameworks: a local authority inspection, an early years framework, an ITE framework. To do that, I needed, 15-16 years of inspection experience. So I foresaw the problems that were going to occur when Amanda Spielman brought in basically a lot of non-inspectors into Ofsted at senior positions, because actually I think we underestimate the skill required to inspect successfully, and I think that it's too easy to say that we can sort of, it's just a case of just telling them what to do, and we give them something and then they go and judge it. And, it boils down to a very simplistic view, and it undermines, I think, the skill that's been developed by, many of us over many years, and appreciate how difficult it is. So I think that there needs to be, the question is, has Ofsted got that expertise in senior ranks at the moment? That's a big question for me. The current chief inspector has never inspected. So that's a big question now on his ability to actually put himself with a team of people who can deliver on a new framework. But just to sort of finish this off, I think the opportunity arises now where the government announced yesterday in the King's speech that they were going to start doing MAT inspections. And so what we can't have now is MAT inspections layered on top of school inspections, with a scorecard thrown in as well. There are far too many moving parts happening here. So for me, I think there needs to be, I do think we need a moratorium on school inspections.
Yeah.
Not all of them. There are still some schools that are pretty risky. We probably know where they are.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to sort the scorecard out with discussion with the profession as to what is a reasonable set. And the government's got a part in that, because obviously they've got an economic driver here. The scorecard can play a part in that. Get that in place, and then we can actually start looking at a MAT inspection that actually sweeps away a lot of school inspection. We still have that, as Edmund mentioned, a skilled expert coming into schools, with a focus on safeguarding. Any of us walk into a school to do a safeguarding visit, you're not just looking at paper, you're looking at relationships walking down corridors, you're looking at how is the head teacher being addressed. But and when you're an inspector, you can't, once you've seen it, you can't ignore it. So
that is, Frank, that is it. I mean, education is a human endeavor. You took the temperature of as many teachers as you could find.
Yes.
But what you really got was the heat. You really felt the passion and the strength, and you felt the humanity behind it. So how do you come up? Because we do need to be inspired. We need to know what's happening in schools. Yeah. Why and who needs to know are very different reasons. If they're for parents, well, that's one thing. If it's for government and statistics, that's another. If they are inspections just to find out what's going on, to wrap the knuckles of head teachers, cause stress, and all sorts of things, and so that's a different thing altogether. But how do you come up with a framework that is human?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I've been fortunate to do inspections and be treated. I've treated people with respect, and people have treated me with respect in return. You know, I have fine-tuned my inspection skills over a long period of time. You know, we've got currently quite a lot of inspectors who just do occasional inspection work, and that for me, and I was a big advocate for current head teachers and senior leaders getting involved in this, but actually it's become more difficult, I think, to support that view on the basis that, you know, I think, you know, people contact me and I'm shocked at what they're telling me some inspectors are doing. And most of them are not your regular inspectors. These are not your 10 years in HMI inspectors. To be honest, I'm hearing that the average time as an HMI is under 3 years. So you're not, even those are not staying very long, you know. And so when you think about what Ofsted's lost in terms of experience, and it's backfilling with fairly inexperienced people, you can see why situations can occur where inspectors are out of their depth a little bit, you know. So I do think the moratorium, Paul, is important. I think we need to, you know, to engage more fully with the profession, and I think we need to value again much more the work of HMI, and also, you know, if we get that MAT inspection system in, we can sweep away a lot of school inspections. You know, summary evaluation process is currently implemented by Ofsted. It's been done, I think about 40 MATs have had this process, and they just touch base with schools, you know, in order to gather evidence to get a view of the MAT. Now, that would mean that the vast majority of schools wouldn't have a formal inspection. You know, I think we over inspect. We spend far too much money on it, and I think there's far too many schools say, do you know what, we'll wait until the Ofsted's out of the way and then we'll do that really good initiative.
I think we certainly used to do it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, gentlemen, and I'm sure it's going to be a topic we definitely will revisit very, very shortly, probably as we get an understanding of what this new government wants to do, and as they kind of get their feet under the table. But we really appreciate your time tonight.
I want to say, just put it on record, Edmund, thank you for your support. Right, you've been there, but also, you know, Adam, you know, you know, giving me a platform a couple of months ago, it was really helpful. So thank you for that as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you very much.
I'm so grateful for everything you've done. That I think you know, it's one thing crying out about how dreadful the Big Listen was. It's quite another thing to actually take on an alternative Big Listen yourself. It's an amazing piece of work, and I'm so glad that it exists. I think it's very good at helping inform the conversation from here.
Yeah, and we are a double act, so thank you to Colin Richards and also a guy called Dave Smith who did all the comms and other colleagues as well. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, no worries. Have a great evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Bye,
everyone.
Right, so we're just going to, as about halfway stage, we're just going to say hello to our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Easy4U is where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support and embracing technology, Easy4U isn't just providing tools, they are shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more.
And thank you again for all our sponsors. And I did want to say at the start, if you are a head teacher and or anyone working in a particularly stressful situation, please reach out and speak to people. We've said this on a number of occasions on Education Tonight. Education generally, and this is why we're talking about this issue, is a community, and everyone was shocked by the sad passing of Ruth Perry. And I do want to kind of make sure that you are reaching out and speaking to people, whatever network you have, or if you do need to speak to one of the many charities that deals with mental health issues, or seek professional help, please reach out and do so whilst you can. We don't want to kind of another situation like that, because it was traumatic for the community of education as it happened. And I remember the podcast we did almost straight away after with Edmund, and it was a heartbreaking evening as we went through kind of that particular case. So our second story tonight is looking at I think we'll call it persistent. The DfE calls it persistent absence rate. So in 2023, it was 22.3%, and in 2024, it is now 20.2%. Okay, win is a win. We've dropped a little bit, but it's still a large amount of students who are missing from our education. We've got about 117,000, just over 170,000 children missing in education altogether in 2022-23. And I'm really delighted to say tonight we've got author, podcaster. I don't know, how do you want to introduce yourself, Terry? All round kind of journo.
Yeah, I mean, I tailor it depending on my company. But tonight, Matthew, I'll be a journalist and an author, I think, for the purposes of this conversation. But I've covered that awful phrase, ghost children, but school absence, education, and then kind of wider child protection and child welfare, really intensely for the last 3 years. Really, I was a film journalist. I edited Empire magazine for 6.5 years. I edited magazines in New York, but since becoming a freelance journalist, I've moved more into kind of.
I told a friend you're going to be on, they're like, "Oh wow, the editor of Empire."
I have two distinct audiences: people who either want to talk to me about Rocky 2, or people who want to talk to me about elective home education or special educational needs and disabilities. So they are two quite distinct areas. But absence has been something I've covered very intensely.
Should we try? Because me and Paul had this conversation earlier on the week. We had as a team. We were putting the show together. What is the right language to use? Is ghost children right? It's the one that the press go with a lot, but obviously I can see what you're reacting.
No, it's hated. And do you know what? It was funny because we worked on. So the first bit I did was a 6-part podcast for the BBC, but I've done lots of national newspaper and magazine coverage. And when we first announced the podcast series, I got a load of negative feedback on my socials and stuff, and I couldn't really work it out. And then the longer I spent under the bonnet of it, I totally got it, because ghost children it's like these children have died almost. But B, they're not even missing. They're not, the language around it is very confusing, very unhelpful. And it's really about absence. But even within that, you know, part of the problem I discovered, you know, it's an outsider coming in, I suppose, was that covers truancy. But it also covers kids who cannot get special educational needs and disability provision in their schools and are desperate for it. There are kids who have very, very long-term mental health issues and can't get any support whatsoever through the NHS. There are kids who are in incredibly deep poverty, can't physically get to school, or they're in a homeless situation, whether that be kind of staying in a hostel or sofa surfing with their parents, and they may live 9 miles away from school and can't get there. And so this one word encompasses all these children who are in these completely different situations. And quite honestly, I think, as we saw yesterday with the response to the announcement of the homeschooling register in the King's speech, I mean, as a journalist, I was despairing. All the headlines saying how this was going to solve truancy, it was going to solve the absence crisis, which, I mean, 3 separate national newspapers used the word truant this week, which that isn't the thrust of the issue at all. Yeah. So I think it's talking about absence. Elective home education is an entirely different thing that has nothing to do with absence. They are not absent. The local authority knows they are no longer registered at school. And to then be as specific as possible with the, I suppose, specifics of what we're talking about. But I fully understand 3 years in the frustrations, especially of parents, but also teachers and schools, because part of it fuels
really interesting because I kind of said, so when we came back from COVID, I kind of just watched my percentages in class just gradually move down. I think I was always used to kind of getting 100%. And taking that as read, the 100% would be the guide, and then it'd be the odd 1 or 2 that would kind of just, be a bit poorly, or they'd have something kind of that we knew about as a school that they'd be away for sort of periods of time. But then more and more, it became kind of that we started to work towards 95%, and then 90%. And then kind of that seems to be kind of drifting towards the norm. So just to fill in what you said, that the previous government back in 2022 tried to kind of put this kind of register together through the schools bill. That didn't happen, or what they called a kind of truancy register at the time, or the Sunday Times certainly did at the time. And it's kind of it's come back on as part of the King's speech this week. But just track back a little bit. Is this, as kind of, maybe I've been kind of wrong in my own judgment there, is this a situation that's occurred kind of after COVID, or was it a situation that was kind of running up to COVID and now we're just really aware of it?
I mean, it was, so if you trace it back, there were definitely elements before COVID for sure. And what is interesting, and it's a bit of an area of debate, is there is a kind of concern that a social contract was broken between school and pupil and family actually during that time, that children were no longer kind of in that habit. There were sort of basic questions being asked about the importance of being at school every day versus can you learn in other situations? Do you need to be there all the time? And Robert Halfon, the Conservative MP, was actually the person who came up with Ghost Children. And to be honest, that was during COVID. It was 2020. And I think he'd seen and heard similar things that you're describing. And he was really anticipating where he was concerned we'd end up, which is kids not returning fully or returning part-time almost, and school no longer being seen as that essential thing, which is you do not have a choice, you go to school. I think where it's kind of the wheels have come off a bit is there's a lot of strong feeling around the assessment of attendance. So a lot of parents, for example, who for whatever reason their child cannot thrive or cannot correctly get on in a traditional educational setting, they find the 100% push very difficult. And I think a lot of people are trying to unpick education from school in terms of, isn't it about education first and foremost, or is it being in the school walls? Now, I went on a bit of a journey myself within it, because I basically loved school as a kid. I grew up in poverty in my early years, and then there was quite a lot of abuse in the house during my childhood, and particularly from, you know, reception. So from 5 very much until I was probably at senior school. School was vital for me in terms of safeguarding. So there was a teacher who intervened, who called social services when I turned up and said a guy who'd been sent to prison for abusing me was back in the house. I'd gone to school and told her. She'd got social services involved. And, you know, I had a pretty dreadful time at home, and school was a place of safety for me. And it gave me options, it gave me confidence, it just gave me somewhere to be every single day without being terrified, knowing I wasn't going to get assaulted. And I remember during COVID, when Boris Johnson first said, as of tomorrow or as of Monday, whatever the wording was, you mustn't leave your house, I turned to my boyfriend and said, oh my God, those poor women and kids who are stuck at home with the men who abuse them. And that was my first thought. And then we heard about and read about the case of Arthur Lavinia Hughes, who was absent at the time he was murdered by his dad's girlfriend, Emma Tustin. And they deliberately kept him off school. It was the 9th or 10th day that he died on. They deliberately kept him away because he was showing signs of abuse. And so I started off from a position of, this is key for safeguarding. Schools have it. I mean, you know, I know teachers aren't social workers, although, I mean, I've heard plenty of stories to suggest they're doing a pretty good job of that as well. But that actually, it forms that kind of contract you have, but also those eyes of adults who aren't the family are really vital. And so I came at it from very much that approach. And over the time, kind of what I was hearing was, you know, so many different things. So we did a phone in at one point just on special educational needs and disabilities. And the phone lines were jammed with parents saying, you know, the resource isn't there, the money isn't there, my child hasn't been able to go into school for X amount of time, I've had to give up my job to try and help them. You know, families falling apart, families where kids just cannot go to school or desperate to. And as poverty has risen, which again has been a huge leap in the last 4 years, I cover child poverty extensively. As poverty's worsened, that's also made it much harder. Kids who are turning up having not eaten. I know obviously part of Labour's offering is going to be a free breakfast in every school, but we're talking about kids with no shoes, right? Kids who are growing up in chaotic households. I went to a school in Barrow where a teacher was physically climbing through windows, stepping over unconscious parents to physically take the child into school, kind of having to bring in the whole family. But there's obviously a world of difference between that, say, and a child who needs specific provision that just isn't there. We know the councils are all pretty much bankrupt. So I think it's partly COVID kind of kick-started something that was really, really it was underway anyway, but we have seen a lot of pressures that have really piled on and have made this a much more extreme problem in quite a short period. And the numbers you just gave, I mean, we've been between 20 and 24, 25% persistent absence since this began. I think it'll go up again because basically the autumn numbers you just gave, or the spring numbers, they're the highest yet, and it's seasonal. So the winter numbers are always worse because you guys know better than anyone the kind of increase in sickness. And so actually I think the next lot of numbers, because there's quite a significant lag we're on, will be worse again. I mean, in totality,
the data we got to was the 24th of this year. The absence rate, therefore, was 7.4% across all schools. It's really interesting that actually authorized absence is around kind of, again, 4.5%. So it shows you about the amount of absence that's not reported at all. Obviously, you're an expert in this field, and we'd love to talk to you all night, but I do want to kind of get you on kind of what do you think some of the solutions are going forward? Where do we go with as a teaching body?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me say, I spoke to so many teachers as part of this and spent time in schools, and we are beyond lucky to have the teaching profession that we have. But I also know what it costs teachers. I know what they're being expected to do above and beyond their day job. You know, they have to tend to a child. If a child is in poverty and in distress, they have to tend to that before they can teach the class. And they were saying to me that they used to get kind of the odd child. It was like that. Now they're talking multiple children in one class, and they are going above and beyond. Doesn't quite cover it, I have to say. And the impact of social care being so fundamentally broken means there's no consistency of social work in terms of seeing the same social worker. The kids don't build relationships. So I think that has to be recognised. And I think we talk about the recruitment and retention crisis. Teachers are burnt out. They are absolutely kind of being made to wear 7 hats, and they're in a job driven by passion. And when it's as hard as it has been, I completely understand what that does to a teacher's mental health. But the data is clear from somebody like the Centre for Social Justice, who actually do a lot of work around digging into the data that the government put out. And that the latest lot, the autumn 2023, they always track who exactly is overrepresented in those numbers very consistently. So if you are on free school meals, and we all know that that is actually, you know, there are 900,000 children in our country who are technically in poverty and aren't eligible for free school meals, because we know it's very, very low, the barrier for that. However, you are 3 times as more likely to be absent as a child if you are on free school meals. And then the other significant overrepresentation is seen in special educational needs and disabilities. And that has been consistent since 2020. So the problem is the register doesn't solve any of that, because home educated kids are counted for over here separately. They're not absent. Absent kids are still on school registers and not going to school. They will not show up on this register. They'll be counted as they are now. It doesn't help us re-engage them if it's about re-engagement. But what it's actually about is, what do we do about provision for special educational needs and disabilities? What can we accommodate in mainstream school, and what can't we? And what are the options for those kids, especially who are on a proper plan and need very specific support? The consequences of poverty are only going to worsen, because as the 2-child benefit cap continues to roll out, because it's only 2/3 rolled out at the moment, another 650,000 kids are going to be put in poverty by 2027 to 28 just from the 2-child benefit cap, which means all the consequences. So absence, if everything continues on as is, absence won't improve. So I think it has to be a whole kind of holistic approach. I mean, in a dream world, right, I think early years is vital. Things that used to be caught by Sure Start, either family dynamics, stuff that the parents need support with, stuff the kids need support with, often picked up in Sure Start situations. Now they're being carried into schools. I think and we know that more than pays for itself, Sure Start. The Institute for Financial Studies figures showed that. But when it comes to poverty, how do we get those kids into the classroom, which means keeping them in the community, which means there has to be a better provision of social housing. And then, you know, the school breakfast, I think, count for something. That is absolutely not going to be a significant measure, I don't believe. I just don't. And then
Terry,
I think...
Terry, can we just move away from...
Just one last thing, and then I just wanted to mention one thing that I'm really excited by, which is I went and spent time with Football Beyond Borders in Brixton, who use school in football to re-engage kids with severe absence. So the kids who traditionally would be lost their entire educational career. Their statistics speak for themselves. And I think youth and peer workers used on the ground within communities on a grassroots local level, how they're either partnerships or they're embedded in schools or whatever it may be, and specific absence staff, like absence, somebody whose responsibility it is to support teachers on the ground on a community level.
I read a lot about them today, and their work is fantastic and it's very successful. Yeah. So look, we know there are a lot of social issues, and you know, if we could just set those aside for a minute, is there anything specific that schools can do to help get children in?
I think what some of the successful stuff I saw out on the ground was when teachers were kind of had to go the extra mile. There was a lot of them physically bringing kids into school, which it gets a mixed response. Some parents, especially if their kids have complex needs, that would be the worst thing you could do. But in certain communities, it is clear that there were a significant portion of kids going in because an adult went and got them. And I don't think that should be a teacher's job, but is there somewhere between an absence monitor and a youth peer monitor who literally helps the kids who you're most concerned about walk through the gates? Things like provision of youth.
I know in our school, we actually bought a minibus, and the minibus could do 3 or 4 rounds and pick up chronic poor attenders like that. Does the curriculum need to change to be more engaging?
You see, I didn't get any sense really that there is a kind of fundamental problem with learning, even with kids wanting to learn. There is something around, if it is a particularly disadvantaged community, if the parents have lost hope and lost their own connection with the community, that can be hard to disrupt from the outside because it becomes a family thing, right? And for me, it's kind of why anything has to be holistic. It has to include the whole family. It's very hard to target a kid if the parent, thinks that authority is not to be listened to, kind of has their own issues. It's how much the kind of longer I spent there, I was like, the answers are all in the community. They're all in the school. They're on the ground. These kids and their parents actually want to be understood. They want to be heard. The kids don't want to be humiliated going in because they haven't got deodorant or because they can't afford a blazer. Make a room full of free school uniforms and let the kids just go in and take them, which is what I saw in one school. So they didn't have the humiliation of feeling like they were begging. Do you know what I mean? Like, but how can we instill respect in our young people who already have life a lot harder than they should have? And I think whatever can be done on the ground at grassroots, building relationships. Football Beyond Borders is all relationships. And part of the problem with social care in those communities is the kids would tell me they'd never seen the same social worker once, so why would they ever trust them? Trust is a massive thing, but the trust I saw for them with the teachers they loved was inspirational, and their lives were being changed.
Cool. I think that's where the secret lies, isn't it? Those kind of like long-term relationships. Well, Terry, thank you very much for your time tonight, and keep going with all the hard work that you're doing. As you can see here, you've got an audience listening, and we are picking it up, and we are kind of taking these things on board. So we really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much for being on Teachers Talk Radio. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right, thank you very much, Terry, and to our other guests tonight. We've had an absolutely action-packed show. I'm off to finish my 3 litres of water.
I'm nearly through mine.
I was just thinking during that in that whole hour I've had not one sip of water. A kid at school would have already had kind of 3 litres. we'll just have a kind of a quick thank you again to our sponsors tonight. Really appreciate them kind of helping us. We've got John Catt Educational, Teaching How-Tos, Apps for Good, and Reading Solutions UK as well. You can go back to all the Education Tonight shows on YouTube. They're kind of stacked up there waiting for you. And I believe, if he's not still with the orangutans out in Borneo, Mr. Poland will be back to join us next week. So I think I'm getting ready just to pour a cup of tea and just release Brent back onto the airways to kind of fill it out. But I really appreciate your help and support, Paul, over there, and Hannah.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Over the last couple of weeks.
But, we should maybe also say Chris Wilkinson is started now on Podbean just right now. If listeners have an appetite for more about teaching.
It's a cheeky one tried to jump onto our promo to say I'm on as well. I did see that. Very good, very good. Yeah, very opportunist, Chris. Well done. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Look, again, with all that's been said tonight, in all seriousness, make sure that you are looking after yourselves, and where you can support and notice signs of safeguarding, please make sure they're raised to the appropriate authorities and to people at your school. Don't keep them kind of to yourself. Make sure they are reported properly, because you don't know where that might lead. It might just save somebody's life in some cases, but certainly their kind of well-being as well. So we really appreciate your time tonight. And for most people, it's kind of breaking up in England anyway. I don't know, what does Northern Ireland do? Do they go on?
We're finished long ago. We never worked July and August. Oh no,
like Scotland. Scotland are kind of done, aren't they? And it's all over. All the best, and good night. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.